Okay. Dimitri, why don't you kick us off? Are we going about disease in entirely the wrong way? And should we be stopping people from aging in the first place and therefore stopping them from getting sick altogether?
Of course we should. However, this is quite complicated question in sense of, if you consider it from investment point of view. So for me, aging, longevity, neuroscience, this is not a theory, it is not a sci-fi movie, it is not something like futuristic. For me, it is business. And we are considering and analyzing all these technologies, scientific breakthroughs in tangible, measurable way, and we are trying to forecast and predict in this way. And therefore, we're considering these 3 stages of practical implementation of these technologies and treatments. We can be confident that, for example, approximately in 5 to 10 years horizon, there will be a lot of technologies, treatments, practical implementation of these treatments, which will give us life extension capabilities, which will be evaluated and validated with these capabilities. Meanwhile, in next 1, 2, 3 years, I think there will be a lot of progress on the other side, on the side of digital medicine, on the side of IT technologies, different medical devices, and specifically blockchain technology and artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence not only for healthcare, not only for consumer side, but also for drug discovery, for R&D. And the second stage, we can expect that it will be probably in 3 to 5 years, because all these implementations of novel technologies, digital health, artificial intelligence, they will bring us much more better understanding how we can develop panel of biomarkers of aging. So, because having that really clear biomarkers, really tangible biomarkers of aging, will give us tools and leverages to accelerate development of really well-working technologies for life extension, but not only for life extension in general, but first of all for extension of healthy period of life, which is much more important on like short-term, for short-term goals. It is much more important rather than to speak about just life extension, because extension even on average for 5 to 10 years healthy period of life will bring a lot of benefits for society and will save a lot of life.
So Alex, I mean, Joseph, sorry, isn't that the point really, that we're quite good at making people live for longer already, but what we're not good at doing is from stopping them from aging?
Well, I fully agree, and can you hear me? So I'm here as a CEO of Alnutra, which is a spin-off from the University of Southern California, and going back to your question, some 23 years ago at the University of Southern California, we decided to launch a war against aging. And for us, it was obvious that you don't get Alzheimer's at age 22, you don't get your first diabetes type 2 at age 20, and aging is really the catalyst behind these diseases. And 23 years ago, up to 15 years ago, we wanted to understand how we age at the cellular level so that we do something for the aging process. And this is one of our founder, Professor Longo, if you're familiar with that name, started looking at the cellular pathways of aging, how the cell goes for an aging process versus an anti-aging process. And this is the age where we identified the relationship between aging and the PK and the RAS pathway, and Cynthia Kenyon identified the TOR pathway. And after this phase, we said, okay, what intervention could we apply to slow the aging process or to enhance the quality of the aging process? And we came across fasting. And fasting is not a new notion for you in the UK. The UK media covered fasting pretty extensively. And we discovered that if you fast the body for several days in a row, as a reaction, the body starts as a defense, and this has been built through hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution where food was scarce from time to time and absent actually very frequently. The body reacts into getting rid of the elderly cells who are not very cost effective from a calorie standpoint, spending the calories, and pushes the stem cells to replace those. So there's a stem cell regeneration process, which we described, we patented, and we had a preclinical and a clinical trial on, We're actually really happy to have the very first preclinical and clinical trials completed on aging and healthspan and published in Cell and Science and Translational Medicine. And now, as of last year, we were able to develop what we call a fasting mimicking diet. It's difficult to fast for 5 days nowadays with all the marketing and the food market we're talking about. So we were able to develop a very a natural plant-based fasting mimicking diet, a food that you will eat over 5 days, mimics fasting and actually reverses your biological age. Again, the only technology in the world with a patent on aging and a preclinical and a clinical trial on it. So it's extremely exciting for us, and the product has been launched in the UK just 2 months ago, heavily covered by the media, so we're really excited. We brought it to the UK as a second country after the US. And for those of you who are interested, it's called Prolon, Prolon. And so going back to your question, yes, it's not only thinking about aging, we're making it a reality, and it's up for us today to create a market for it. I think what Dimitri was relating to is we need to invest in that market. We need to make it overcome the policy challenges. We all hear about aging, but how would you pass a drug for aging? The FDA doesn't recognize aging as a disease, and aging is not a disease, it's a catalyst of diseases. How to position aging as a pre-disease setting so that the FDA helps us with that, with processing the filing in that regard, create a market for it, and then have additional investments and a focus from the NIH and the big grantees to boost that space.
Alex, how far away are we, do you think, from the FDA and others sort of recognizing that aging is something that needs to have products and services approved for it?
Well, I think that we are already at the stage where the FDA and the regulators and the academic and the community and the pharma is considering aging seriously. There is a study called the TAME study targeting aging with metformin, led by Nir Barzilai out of the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. And it's a very important study for everybody. It's one of the kind of oldest dogs trying to learn the new tricks, metformin. I think a lot of people maybe in this room are taking metformin. And this study is going to show whether metformin has anti-aging properties as a drug and set standards for clinical trials and clinical trials enrollment practices for a study which also measures aging in general. But I think, so our company is an artificial intelligence company, and many of the pharmaceutical companies here know us as a service provider for drug discovery. So we were the first to publish and the first to validate a technology called generative adversarial networks, the application of this technology to generating new molecular structures. So you give us a target and we generate a molecule for you that you can synthesize that has very high probability of hitting this target and making a perfect drug. But I think that the pharmaceutical model where you have just one target, one disease, is fundamentally wrong. So by studying aging and by looking at it as a systemic process, everybody in this room has aging. Not everybody has cancer, not everybody has Alzheimer's, not everybody has diabetes, but everybody has aging. So it's a set of many biological processes that happen at the same time. So you can look at this phenomenon as a systemic condition, progressing systemic condition. So you can start training deep neural networks to recognize your age at every level, transcriptome, proteome, just pictures. Very many people just underestimate the value of pictures even. I think the photograph is more valuable than your genome because you can derive a lot more information from it using deep neural nets. And I think aging research would drive pharma into more systemic applications of, drug discovery, multi-targeting drug discovery, and it's happening right now. So in some countries, in Korea, in China, people are seriously thinking about focusing on AI and longevity from the regulatory perspective as well.
Aubrey, I mean, how interested is pharma in the space of anti-aging, given the sort of potential, I suppose, for it to really disrupt its own business model as of today?
I feel that big pharma is kind of waiting and seeing, but it's waiting and seeing and paying a lot of attention. essentially, Big Pharma appreciates that medicine is changing, and especially that we are developing an increasingly and eventually a decisively comprehensive panel of ways to eliminate the ill health associated with old age, and that those things are going to dominate the nature of medicine in the relatively near future. So, of course, Big Pharma has to be anticipating that, but at the same time, Big Pharma has to be maintaining situation normal in the current situation before these therapies come along. So it's a kind of slightly subtle situation. I don't think that it is fair to suggest simply that Big Pharma would be opposed to this transition, this transformation of medicine. I think, like any company or any industry, Big Pharma will follow the money and will follow the developments that happen insofar as their customers follow those developments. And it's really just a matter of being ready for it. So I don't think we should be necessarily scared of Big Pharma slowing things down. I want to also emphasize what was already mentioned about the TAME trial on metformin. The key thing for me about that trial is not so much the fact that it's metformin, because really we have no idea whether that's going to work. In fact, I would be quite surprised personally if there were a particularly substantial benefit from metformin. But the key thing is that the trial has been structured in such a way as to be a trial where the outcome is aging in all but name. The FDA don't know what aging is, and so they have to. So there was a long period of discussion and negotiation between the FDA and the group of academics led by Neil Barzilai, who proposed the trial. And eventually they came up with a rather subtle and sophisticated combinatorial outcome definition, which is as good as a definition of aging without actually using the word. I think that's a huge advance. In fact, I feel that terminology has been a huge obstacle in this whole field for a long time, that the idea has been terribly entrenched in people's heads that there is some kind of undefined phenomenon called the aging process, which is somehow distinct from the diseases of old age. And this is terribly, well, first of all, inaccurate biologically, but it's also terribly damaging and counterproductive. It leads people, companies who are researchers, in wrong directions with regard to the attempt to develop interventions. So the company that I'm representing here, Agex Therapeutics, is focused on the application to various aspects of age-related ill health of stem cells, lineage-committed progenitor cells that have been developed with unusually high purity so as to minimize the risk of unintended effects like cancer from contamination by inadequately differentiated cells that might do the wrong thing. And this is a major part of the panel that we're going to need to address the ill health of old age properly, because there are various aspects of age-related ill health that are driven by cells just going away and not being replaced by cell division. Obvious ones like Parkinson's disease, you lose dopaminergic neurons in the substantia nigra, and also plenty of less obvious ones, loss of pacemaker cells in the heart, things like that. These are things that need to be addressed by technologies that are also already being developed for the treatment of other things that are legitimately called diseases. And if we want to call it aging that we're addressing, then okay. But ultimately what we have to recognize is that we're doing repair of the self-inflicted damage that the body does to itself throughout life, and therefore that we are effectively developing comprehensive rejuvenation. But what this gets away from is the idea that there's some unitary concept of the fundamental aging process, and therefore that there might, in principle, be some unitary single magic bullet that would, in a coordinated way, slow things down. A number of people are interested in trying to promote that idea in order to make money, but the fact is that the only things that we're ever likely to develop that are unitary in that kind of way will be things that have only a very modest indeed impact on how long people can stay healthy.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions after all of that, but before that we have a polling question. Having heard what you've all heard in that sort of opening gambit, when do you think regulators, I suppose we're talking about the US here, will approve the first anti-aging drug? And there's a bunch of different time periods, so pick the one that best suits your opinion. You talk about this sort of inflection point that pharma companies are going to have to go through. But surely society is as well, and is already short of cash to pay for all the illness that affects sick people. So where is the money going to come from to stop people from getting sick in the first place? I mean, who wants to take that big potato, hot potato? Go ahead.
Well, I think if you track pharma for the last 20 years, most of the new or the innovation coming out of pharma was shopped out of pharma. Small researchers that through NIH money, for example, you have a good $30 billion per year, and that comes at no risk of shareholders pushing you for the outcome. So a lot of the real innovation is coming from different corners of different universities, trying new things and taking risks. And I think we could well see the next anti-aging product coming out of one of these shops. And it's not so much the investment, because now we do recognize the importance of aging, and actually it's going to be the biggest market in healthcare. Every one of us has aging, and a fraction of us will have each one of the chronic diseases. The problem is going to be the FDA, but it seems the FDA is going to be flexible, recognizing the socioeconomic value of aging. The problem is going to be reimbursement. If you have an aging product, whether it's a drug, whether it's food, whether it's a service, who's going to pay for it every day or every week or every month, whatever that prescription is? And pharma takes less risk when there's no clear path to reimbursement, regulatory and reimbursement. So I do believe the product is going to come from one of the risk-taking researchers with grants, but then the more we get clarity on regulatory and reimbursement, the more you're going to see pharma taking risk there or shopping for these pockets of research and then having a market established there.
Quite a sort of variance of results there, but an optimistic room, 4 to 6 years, has got the biggest vote there, over a quarter of you. So
if I could say one about on this question. So, I mean, I agree with what Joseph said. I think, though, that there really isn't going to be much headwind associated with all of this. So my other affiliation is at Sense Research Foundation, which is a non-profit based in California. And we created it as a non-profit because 10 years ago or more, we were working on things which were at too early a stage to be investable, even by the more visionary, high-risk, high-reward type investors. But that's no longer true. I mean, it's somewhat true. The foundation still has an essential role as the kind of engine room of the industry. But we've been able to spin out quite a lot of projects now into startup companies, and there are other startup companies, of course, not associated directly with us, but in our space. And major, very successful, very influential investors are getting heavily involved in this now. Since we're in London, I should probably mention Jim Mellon, who is, of course, a well-known and very successful British investor, and who has put a lot of effort into into educating other investors, communicating to the investor community. He decided in the past couple of years to get heavily involved in this space as what he perceived as very much the next big thing. He's taken the trouble to write a whole book about it called Juvenescence. This is the kind of people who are going to be the opinion formers that drive all of this. And as the investment community grows through the influence of these pioneers like Jim, I think we're going to see all of the players in all sectors of the industry, however, by whatever means they are making their money, they're going to see that it's in their interest to adapt as rapidly as everybody else is. So I see this change happening a lot faster than it may look at this point.
So I'd like to add a little bit to that. Right now we see massive technology convergence and also massive funding convergence from multiple sources. So you also see lots of government funding going into aging-related areas. One of my hobbies is tracking government funds, actually, just to understand where the trends are. You can go to a resource called pharmacognitive.com, key in a keyword, and see the funding trends from the NIH, European Commission, many countries. And if you look at the amount of government funding going to biomedicine in general, it's increasing very, very quickly. So it might seem that the government is not doing much, but if you look at China, Japan, there is massive investment into biomedicine in general, and lots of this investment goes into aging-associated diseases, age-related diseases. So many scientists, they do not call themselves aging scientists, but they contribute more to the field of anti-aging, well, I don't like that term, the field of longevity research, than people who actually claim to be working specifically in this field. Also, large technology giants like Google, Facebook. Right now, there is a major revolution in deep learning. So if you are not in deep learning right now, you are already late to the table. Now, again, the power of the picture, just the image of the face, linked to other biomarker data, is extremely valuable. So soon you're going to use selfies for clinical trials enrollment, I hope. A massive effort is being done on the part of technology giants to advance deep learning. So that's kind of putting many companies like us, for example, at the forefront of artificial intelligence research when we focus on aging as a biological process and then retrain on diseases. So that gives us a lot of tools. Another major effort is done within pharma. So if you look at companies like Novartis, for example, a really great company which actually has an aging research group internally. They also find new business models to go after. They just recently completed, published a study in Science Translational Medicine giving everolimus to healthy elderly people as a vaccine potentiator and spun off that company. Spun off that as a company. So it's ROD001 study, and they're focusing on muscle wasting, so active receptor inhibitors. Sarcopenia was classified as a disease just recently, so most likely we're going to see some drugs coming out of that area. And lots of efforts on the part of pharmaceutical industry in age-related diseases. So a lot of that is going to overflow into the just general longevity revolution.
I think one of the things that also we're all shopping for aging is how to measure, biological age or the age process. If as Peter Drucker says, if you measure, you manage. And one of the things that are going to attract maybe the investors, then reimbursement, and also the FDA is how to measure aging. If you have an intervention for aging, how can you be sure that this is effective and fast? Because ideally, you're not going to wait until the end of the person's life to do that. And measuring biological aging is something we see a lot of movements in a lot of companies. Alex alluded a little bit at the phenotype and the pictures. We have other, methylations and other methods that you're going to see a lot of movements in. So that's big, exciting news for us. Once we're going to measure biological aging and track it, I think you're going to see a lot of investment, a lot of movements around, finding what is HbA1c and glycemia for diabetes, what is that metric for aging and biological aging?
With that here, that regarding biomarkers of aging and applying really strong artificial intelligence for this topic, I'm quite confident that first of all, it will be in Silicon Medicine with Alex Javronko, because it is in this field one of the strongest companies applying artificial intelligence for drug discovery, but in particular for biomarkers, and in particular biomarkers of aging, which is other companies. I know only one another company which is trying to do something similar in this space. Now, regarding to go back to this field as a financial field, as longevity, is to consider longevity as a business. So I'm supporting several non-profit foundations, and in particular Biogerontology Research Foundation, this UK foundation. So during last year, we were working on creating a mind map and of longevity industry and the science of longevity. And we created mind maps and list of 100 companies which are working in the space, which are working on any technology somehow related with precision, preventive, personalized medicine, regenerative medicine, and aging in general. Also, we created a list of 100 laboratories and R&D centers and 100 non-profit foundations. So actually, we created the entire mind map of all this industry, including 100 top investors, including not only, so there are some, let's say, ultra high net worth individuals who are investing in such technologies in early stage, but also several venture funds, and some of them already specifically tuned for longevity research and companies which are working in this space. This report, it's actually already 800 pages report. We are considering that it will be kind of like Wikipedia or Encyclopedia Britannica of longevity industry. It will be published in December on longevity.international website.
So you mentioned ultra high net worth individuals there. One of the things that this field suffers from, I think, is the sense that it's a billionaires' playground and it's going to sort of be there for rich people and then maybe developed nations, but not for sort of poorer people. And isn't that a big problem when you're actually stopping people from getting sick? Because then you really do have the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah, I think this is really totally overblown, this concern. The fact is, the world we have today, in which we can't basically do anything about the ill health of old age, is a world in which we spend the most insane amount of money trying to help people as best we can when they're in that sick state that they get into when they were born a long time ago. And therefore, if and when, as and when, we develop medicines that stop people from getting into that state, those medicines will pay for themselves insanely rapidly, insanely many times over. And governments and other, decision makers are going to know that. They're going to see that. They're going to be well aware of it, even before the medicines actually arrive. So there is not going to be any lag there. The front-loaded investment that's going to be required to ensure that everybody who is old enough to need these therapies can get them, irrespective of ability to pay, is going to be provided, even in really tax-averse countries like the USA, simply because, as with, for example, basic education, which is also free, even in the USA, right? It's just going to be seen to be a no-brainer. In fact, not just a no-brainer, but an absolute mandate that even ignoring the humanitarian imperative, the sheer mercenary economic logic, arithmetic, says that you'll go bankrupt if you don't do this. So yeah, I don't think there's the faintest possibility that certainly any developed country will have any kind of stratification of access to these therapies.
And any questions from the audience on this topic? Everyone's too young to care. So one question I was going to ask is, we've heard over and over again in these last couple of days about how taking an illness and sort of segmenting it into lots of smaller illnesses is really the way that you get results. And yet here we are talking about aging, which is perhaps the biggest illness or biggest health problem of all, and as you say, affects everybody. So what attempts have there been to try to take aging and really split it into as many possible fields as possible to get the kind of results we've had in cancer and rare diseases?
I think what you have to remember is that the fashionable thing today, personalized medicine, all that kind of thing, this is a stopgap. We don't have personalized polio vaccines. And the reason we don't is because the generic polio vaccine just works. The only reason to have personalized medicine is to optimize things that don't really work. So it's not really a dichotomy in the way that you're describing. What we're doing now is, it makes sense, in terms of personalizing and splitting things up, it makes sense with what we have today. But it will naturally go away in favor of a more unified network approach, so to speak, that treats aging as what it actually is. The whole interaction of these various damage accumulation processes that eventually overwhelm the body and make us not well.
Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it depends on the intervention that's going to end up happening. So I'll take two examples. There's a lot of research today on the TOR pathway and mTOR pathway for aging, and that's one pathway within the cell that does not mainly work on the PKA or the RAS pathway. Fasting, for example, works on the 3 pathway. So it's going to depend on the technology itself and what's going to work on. Is it going to be a systemic one, which is, I think, what Audrey is referring to, and we all age on a systemic level, or is it going to be a partial anti-aging intervention that's going to work on a few pathways? It's not going to be ideal, but it could help, and this is probably what metformin is going to end up doing, or a rapamycin product on an mTOR pathway versus a fasting, which historically we all had to go through periods of no food, and the body reacts epigenetically the same way to save us. So there are more systemic versus more pathway-dependent intervention, and we'll see which one gets first to market and whether that's going to be a tailored or systemic intervention.
I think we're going to see both. And I hope that in the very near future, we're going to see first more targeted approaches, again, more targeting sarcopenia, diabetes, Alzheimer's, both on the treatment and prevention to establish the business models for the pharmaceutical industry. And I'm very concerned right now about this movement of food as medicine. Sorry for kind of saying that after the previous session, because people start thinking that they can treat cancer with food. And if you think about advances like PD-1, PD-L1, STLA4, checkpoint inhibitors, how much that impacted cancer research, it's completely transformed cancer therapy. So food is not going to make us significantly younger or live significantly longer or prevent diseases. I mean, you're going to have those anyway. So I hope that the pharmaceutical industry will finally find new business models to address first diseases of aging and then go into a more systemic approach, but not with food, maybe with something else.
Yeah, we actually have trials on food versus medicine, and I'm happy to show you some of it is not published. And food could do as much or even better actually than most medicines, and I'll share those privately, but I have actually a different opinion. I have a big faith in food. Again, food is something you inject into your body at least 3 times a day, and that's going to determine mostly what's going to end up happening to your body. And food could drive aging faster or slow it and inflammation, etc. So I think pharma is going to come up with a more, if you want, deeper arrow working on pathways. But aging is such a systemic process that you cannot solve it in 1 or 2 pathways. Fasting or food or medical food is going to have a systemic intervention that can help a lot. It's going to end up being both, but I'm a big believer in the food impact on aging and chronic diseases.
Okay, well, we'll have to leave it there. It's a little bit longer to lunch, but I hope I see people fasting at lunchtime. And thank you very much. That was fascinating. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. And now back to